remember when I was looking at universities and trying to figure out where to go, when I arrived at Brown campus, it immediately felt much more homey and inviting. And I think that the students tend to be slightly more adventurous and curious than they were in other campuses, and that's what drew me there. I entered Brown in 1982. I was a student that came from New York City, a public school, a very large public school. So when I arrived, the campus came as a complete and total shock. I was involved in something called Third World Weekend, where they brought all of the minority students who had entered Brown to the campus for about 2 weeks before school started. It was really interesting what they considered to be minority. There was folks like myself who came from the inner city who were African American. There were Latinos who came from the inner city as well. And then we discovered there were also a group of people who came from Africa and from Latin America who were extremely wealthy and very different from ourselves. And we couldn't quite figure out why we were all there together. I arrived at Brown, I feel, at a really opportune moment in our country's history. I found myself in the midst of the fight to have the university divest from the investments in South Africa and became very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. Also, I think it was a moment in which young people were really beginning to deal with sexual orientation issues and to come out. And it happened to coincide with the same moment in which AIDS sort of reared its ugly head. And so I was very supportive and invested in some of my friends' struggles with sexual identity. And I think in some ways that informed some of the plays that I was going to write. I feel as though fear and anxiety are the driving forces in my life. And one of the things that I found refreshing when I got to Brown was the fact that there was this open curriculum and I could really sort of navigate my own path. And I could really decide semester by semester what kind of student I was going to be. When I entered as a pre-med student, but not because it was particularly my passion, but it was because I tested very well in math and science. And one of the things that I loved about Brown is that when I arrived on campus is that I could sort of branch out beyond the math and sciences and take courses that I wouldn't normally take. And one of those courses that I sort of fell into was playwriting. You know, another one of those courses that I fell into was ritual and theater. And that's when I really think that I found who I was in those classes and discovered that I wasn't going to be a doctor. I wasn't going to be a scientist. I wasn't going to be a mathematician because I didn't feel alive in those courses. And I think that if Brown didn't have that kind of flexible, open curriculum, I wouldn't be on the journey that I am on today. The most delightful part of my experience was getting to know one of my professors, who was George Bass, who taught African American theater and playwriting. I think that every semester that I was there, I took a course with him. And I really don't think that my Brown experience would complete if I hadn't taken the journey with him. I mean, he's someone who taught me to love learning. He's someone who taught me to love theater, taught me that I could do something that I was passionate about and make a living and make a life doing it. He had a course in which we were sort of practicing ritual to make theater. And it was at the very end of the course, and we had spent the entire time sort of creating original work that was interfacing with music that we listened to and text that we read. And he had gathered us in this enormous circle, a drum circle, and he asked us to sort of say what we were feeling about the class, and all of us sort of gushed about our experiences, and we were feeling very close together. And he said, I want you to close your eyes. And we all closed our eyes, and he sort of beat the drum, and I can't remember, but he recited a poem. And then he asked us to open the palms of our hands. And I opened the palm of my hand, and I felt him place something in it. And then he asked us to close it. And I felt like there was a little piece of bone in my hand. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And then he said, open your eyes. And when we opened our eyes and looked in our palm of our hands, indeed it was a piece of bone. And he said, you're holding a piece of Langston. And he was, of course, referring to Langston Hughes. And I still have that little piece of Langston Hughes, and I carry it with me. And I imagine it's like paying it forward, that he really wanted us to be connected to, sort of, in my case, one of our literary ancestors. And I think that I can't imagine that I would have had that kind of experience in any other university other than Brown, in which a professor would put a tiny piece of bone of Langston Hughes in your hand as part of your education experience. And I sort of love that, and I relish it. In my sophomore year, I wrote a play. And I wanted to produce it, and I didn't know what to do. And I went to one of my friends and I said, I want to produce this play. He's like, I'm going to direct it. And he's like, and I'm going to find the actors, and I'm going to find the space. And I felt as though that sort of spoke to the collaborative nature of Brown's students. And I was really shocked that, within a month he was able to rally this entire cast. And it was a very, very large cast, and it was all African-American males, and it consisted of people who, by and large, had never been on the stage before. And we put up the show in Fonts Hall, and it did incredibly well. And I felt like I couldn't have done it without my fellow students, and it also introduced me just to sort of how wonderful and magical the collaborations in theater can be. Some of the most important relationships that I still have are the ones that I forged on that campus. I can't remember exactly when I learned that there was a history of slavery on Brown's campus, but I will say that it didn't surprise me, because I think that most of the institutions from that era in America bear those sort of scars of slavery. I think that it's a universal scar. It was really brave and important for Ruth Simmons to discuss the issue of slavery. I liken it to a smudge stick. It's like she took a gigantic smudge stick to the university and cleansed it, because I think that until we sort of publicly addressed it, that wound would be there. One of the things I really love about going to the Brown graduation is the march down the hill, when you can really see the way in which the complexion and diversity of Brown shifts. I love the moments when you see the first women entering the gates, and then you see the first round of Jewish students who enter the gates, probably around the 50s and 60s. And then you see in the 70s the first trickle of African-American students. And then in the 80s you see the Latino students. And then in the 90s you begin to see the Asian students. And for me, it's one of sort of the more glorious moments, because it reflects how America's shifting, and it reflects how Brown has really embraced sort of the shifts in the demographics of the country. I certainly have seen the Brown parodies in the media, and I sort of imagine people make fun of that which they don't understand.
You've reached Stewie and Brian. We're not here right now. And if this is Mom, send money, because we're college students and we need money for books and highlighters and ramen noodles and condoms for sexual relations with our classmates.
It's because Brown students are so disproportionately happy that people in some tiny way resent that. A friend of mine, when I was at Brown, she said, we really have to shift our focus. We're going to be leaving here very soon. We have to stop looking for boyfriends and start looking for husbands. And it seems very, very sort of retro in 1950s, but I met my husband there, and we've been married for a number of years, and I feel as though we're simpatico. I can't imagine having met him anyplace else, because I feel like we're the same person that just happened to he grew up in Westchester, I grew up in Brooklyn. I think it's the nature of Brown that drew us together.